Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Bradford James Gille. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Bradford James Gille was born on May 19, 1983, and was raised in Pellston, Michigan. This town of 800 is on the northern tip of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. Bradford went by the name Brad. He was the youngest of three brothers. In 1999, Brad was diagnosed with schizophrenia. One of his symptoms was paranoia. In 2002, he was arrested and charged with assault with a deadly weapon, but the charge was later dismissed. Brad found himself in trouble again in 2007 when he was charged with domestic violence, and in 2008 when he was charged with assault and battery. In 2012, when Brad was in Florida, he was charged with a controlled substance violation. In 2014, he spent 49 days in jail in Florida for vandalism. By 2015, Brad was back in Michigan. He was in and out of mental health facilities and appeared to be homeless for at least some of the time. On April 11, 2016, Brad made his way to the Greenwood Cemetery in Petoskey, Michigan. He attempted to dig up the casket of a person who had died in February 2016. The police found Brad's van parked near the Emmett County Jail and spoke to him. He told them that he was concerned about people being buried alive. Brad was arrested and charged with dismemberment and mutilation of dead bodies and malicious destruction of tombs and monuments. He was transported to a mental health facility where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. In 2017, Brad was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was sent to a mental health facility for a short time. By September 2024, he lived in a motel in Sheboygan called the North Country Inn. Sometime around April 2025, he moved out of the motel, telling an acquaintance he was going to Traverse City. Later, he was spotted homeless in Pellston and Petoskey. On July 24, 2025, the police in Petoskey interacted with Brad based on alleged loitering behavior, but they did not detain him. On the next day, July 25, they obtained a court order to place Brad in protective custody for a mental health evaluation. Officers started looking for Brad, but they could not find him. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On Saturday, July 26, 2025, Brad Gille was in Traverse City, Michigan, 67 miles south of Petoskey. At 4:10 p.m., he entered a Walmart store. At about 4:43 p.m., while Brad was in the checkout area, he started stabbing people using a folding knife with a 3.5-inch blade. Multiple witnesses called 911. As Brad made his way toward the vestibule, he was confronted by various customers. Two customers, including a former Marine named Matthew Kolakowski, slammed shopping carts into Brad, but Brad managed to escape. Brad allegedly stabbed a woman in the back as he was on his way out of the store. In the parking lot, several customers confronted Brad. One of them was another former Marine named Derek Perry, who produced a firearm and ordered Brad to drop the knife. Other customers also screamed at Brad, telling him to get on the ground and drop the knife. Brad allegedly responded, "I don't care, I don't care." After about 20 or 30 seconds, Brad put the knife down. Matthew grabbed the knife and kept it away from Brad. Matthew said that Brad referred to himself as a soldier. Brad was tackled by multiple customers and held until the police arrived at 4:46 p.m., just 3 minutes after the 911 call started. He was promptly arrested. During the attack, Brad allegedly stabbed 11 people, 6 men between the ages of 38 and 82, and 5 women between the ages of 29 and 84. One of the victims was an employee of Walmart. All the victims are expected to survive. Brad Gille was charged with 1 count of terrorism and 11 counts of assault with intent to murder. At the time I'm making this video, he is being held on a $1 million bond and making his way through the criminal justice system. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. The media spoke to Brad's brother, Shane, who had a lot to say about Brad's mental health history. According to Shane, Brad had a strong reaction to drug use when he was a teenager. He exhibited signs of mental illness and never recovered. As I mentioned, Brad was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1999. Shane discussed some of Brad's unusual behaviors and beliefs. For example, Brad mentioned alien abduction, ran down the highway naked in Pennsylvania, insisted he served in combat during World War II. Brad once drew a circle, a triangle, and a square on a piece of paper and said it was a blueprint for a UFO. And he talked about chickens that had been spayed or neutered. It's not clear if Brad had a personal vendetta against poultry or was genuinely worried about the inevitable chicken population explosion apocalypse. As far as a history of violence, Shane indicated that Brad assaulted their mother when she was driving Brad to a counseling appointment. Brad had been involuntarily committed multiple times, but when he improved, he would be released. The system failed Brad by not providing him long-term care. This sentiment was shared by Brad's mother, who spoke to the media about him in 2007. She stated, quote, "He's fine when he's on his medication. The problem is his illness tells him that he is fine and he doesn't need to take his medication. He's also been through the evaluation so many times that he knows how to answer their questions," unquote. Item number 2. Brad had 2 self-published books for sale on Amazon, which may offer some insight into his mental health symptoms. The first book was titled, "If Then to Awaken as the One True King of Kings and the Lord of Lords." In the description, Brad indicated that he may have been reborn into an earthly family in one of the most naturally resourced, enriched, and yet highly corrupt countries in the world. He lost a friend in 1996, which caused him to pray. This led to him realizing that he was Jesus Christ. Brad had dreams of past lives, tracking back millions of years. He saw himself in the New Testament and in World War II. Brad's second book was titled The Book of I, Jesus Christ. Here he described a life shaped by enigmatic encounters, spiritual revelations, and startling connections to historical figures. Brad grapples with the astonishing revelation of his own identity as Jesus Christ. Both books mention a mysterious spirit who speaks to Brad. He believed the spirit may have been Judas Iscariot. The book descriptions are consistent with psychosis. For example, Brad believed he was a deity, he lived for millions of years, he interacted with important people throughout history, and he spoke to a mysterious spirit. Item number 3. Several customers heroically stopped Brad from stabbing more people. One was a man named Derek Perry, who I mentioned. He used a firearm that was lawfully possessed to convince Brad to surrender. Other customers indicated that Derek's intervention with the firearm was a turning point in the confrontation. Everything changed after that. Brad quickly became a lot more cooperative. Derek was interviewed by the media. He said, "I did not see myself as any type of judge, jury, or executioner. I just wanted everybody to be safe." Derek never once considered pulling the trigger of his weapon. Not surprisingly, the mainstream media has downplayed the role of the armed citizen in this case. They don't seem interested in talking about that part of the story. Traditionally, the media has represented interventions by armed citizens as harmful, scary, and unhelpful. They falsely claim it only creates more danger. When confronted with a homicidal offender, rather than producing their own firearms, citizens should wait for the police to bring their firearms. So everybody agrees that firearms are the solution to a dangerous perpetrator, just not in the hands of responsible citizens. The media doesn't want to talk about Derek because his behavior contradicts their narrative. Derek was peaceful, responsible, heroic, and exercised good judgment. He was not a bully with a gun who was looking for an excuse to use it. Quite the opposite. Derek was only interested in protecting life. He had no interest in shooting anyone. His firearm was simply a tool, one that he used with an impressive level of restraint. Derek's actions could have very well saved lives. He was part of the solution, not part of the problem. Now moving to my final item, number 4. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. When Brad Gille carried out the stabbing attack, he was probably paranoid and delusional. For example, Derek heard Brad say, "They told me to do it." This is consistent with Brad hearing voices. Due to his mental health symptoms, I do not believe that Brad is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But there is no doubt that he is dangerous and he needs to be in a secure facility. Brad appears to have mental health symptoms, including psychosis. He is out of touch with reality. Most people who suffer from psychosis are not dangerous, but Brad does appear to be a threat to society. Throughout his extensive criminal history, he has been charged with a number of offenses, including felonious assault, domestic violence, assault with a dangerous weapon, assault and battery, retail fraud, possession of marijuana, and public intoxication. The whole idea of Brad wandering the streets homeless is just not working out for society. People who have schizophrenia or other disorders involving psychosis are often poorly treated by the mental health system. Brad was denied mental health services that he desperately needed. Mental health clinicians of all types want clients to improve. They want people to be less dependent on the system. The problem is that for some people, mental health treatment really needs to be lifelong. There will never be a sustained remission of symptoms. There is no end. There is no breakthrough counseling session where the client stands up and says, "I'm good now. I can live a productive life. I will never need counseling again." When somebody like Brad comes along, a man who is chronically ill and needs treatment for life, it can be very frustrating for treatment professionals. People with serious mental disorders often improve only for the symptoms to return later. This becomes a vicious cycle of disappointment. People with schizophrenia often work against themselves. They don't want counseling. They don't want medication. They do not want to comply with the recommendations of clinicians. It can be very easy for clinicians to take these statements of resistance and interpret them as an opportunity for empowerment. They may say to themselves, "The client doesn't want treatment. Therefore, he must be better. I don't want to restrict his freedom. I can't be the one who holds him back from his goals." Sometimes clinicians need to be more forceful and confident. If they had been with Brad, the tragedy at Walmart may have been prevented. When a person claims that he is Jesus Christ, has lived multiple lives spanning millions of years, and fought in a war that ended 38 years before he was born, continued mental health treatment should be seriously considered. Those are my thoughts on the case of Bradford James Gille. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.